Welcome, fifth graders. Today we're going to do lesson 6.7, subtracting mixed numbers with renaming. So today we're going to borrow from the whole number to rename that mixed number. Before we get started, I want to review a little bit about whole numbers. So when we're looking at fractions, let's use the square here in the top left. There are four parts, so we're talking fourths. And if we have all four of these pieces shaded in, we have 4/4, or we have one whole. So when every piece is shaded or the same number is on the top as the bottom, then you have one whole. So the circle is cut into 6. So there are 6 pieces. Again, if all pieces are shaded 6 out of 6, 6, 6, we would again have one whole. So anytime that top number matches the bottom number, that's going to equal one whole. And that's going to be very important in today's lesson as we go through, because we're going to be borrowing one whole and we're going to have to be turning that one whole into a fraction. So this rectangle, same thing, cut into 8s. If we're talking all 8 pieces are shaded in, we have 8 out of 8, 8/8, which is also one whole. So when we borrow one whole, it could be anything like 12/12, 3/3, 9/9, or 100 100ths. Every single one of those is going to equal one whole. And that's going to be very important as we go through today in our lesson. As we look to our textbook here, we're going to start on page 389, lesson 6.7. As we go through this, today's lesson is very, very important. So part of your grade for this lesson is going to be making sure that you watch the entire video and making sure you fill everything in your textbook that we write in here. So you will be graded on all the work that you have done inside of your textbook, writing your notes. And Mrs. Laudiker or I will then check that to give you some credit for that. Also, make sure you watch the video all the way to the end for any key pieces that you might miss. So make sure you watch the entire video for this lesson. First question here, it says, to practice for a race, Kara is running 2.5 miles. When she reaches the end of her street, she knows that she has already run 1 5/6 miles. How many miles does Kara have left to run? So we already know how far she's run, and we know how far she wants to run. So we're going to subtract those two. With mixed numbers and fractions, we always want to stack those on top of each other. It makes it a lot easier for us to work straight across. So make sure when you're working these problems out on your own, you stack them just like they are here. So we have 2 1/2 minus 1 5/6. Now remember, we're still going to work the problems with the same steps that we always do. Find a common denominator, make equivalent fractions. Then when we get to the step for subtracting today, it's not going to work out. So that's where we're going to borrow or rename our fraction. Remember, once we do all of our subtracting, the last step is always to put it into simplest form. So they've chosen 12 as the common denominator for 6 and 2. Now remember, there are other denominators that would work, and there might even be one that is the least common denominator other than 12. And that's okay. We'll work that problem here again with the least common denominator. But let's start with the denominator 12. If we counted by 2s and we counted by 6s, they both can turn into 12. Once you come up with your common denominator, the next step is to make equivalent fractions. You ask yourself, what did I do to my denominator to get that common denominator. So what do we do to 2 to get 12? Well, we take 2 times 6 to get 12, and whatever we do to the bottom, we must also do to the top. So we take 1 times 6, that gave us our 2 and 6/12. For the bottom mixed number, we take 6 times 2, and we must also do the same to the top. We're going to take 5 times 2, and we get 1 and 10/12. Remember, you don't do anything with the whole numbers out in front. The next step, once we've made equivalent fractions, is to subtract those two fractions. Well, 6/12 minus 10/12 we can't do because 6 is smaller. So this is where the borrowing comes in. So this is the new concept today. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to cross off the 2 and make it a 1. We're borrowing from the whole number. So we have now just taken one whole away from the whole number, and we're going to give it to the fraction to make it larger. We're going to add a fraction to this 6/12. Well, in order to add, we have to find that common denominator. Our common denominator was 12. So we have to have a 12 on the bottom. What fraction equals one whole that has 12 on the bottom? I want you to think about that. What has to go on the top of 12 in order for it to be one whole? That would be 12/12. So 12/12 equals one whole. So all we've done is taken one whole here, borrowed from it, and given it to the fraction. Now we're going to add those two together. So 6/12 plus 12/12 equals 18/12. And we're going to bring that whole number 1 over with it. So we change the 2 to a 1, and the 1 stays with it. Now we have 1 and 18/12 minus 1 and 10/12. Now, some students may say, well, that's an improper fraction there. It's okay. We're going to have an improper fraction when we borrow. But once we subtract, it will not be an improper fraction. We're going to take 18 minus our 10 and get 8. The denominator will stay the same, 12. And it's 1 minus 1 equals 0, so we do not have to put a whole number in front. If it's a 0, you do not have to write the 0, you just leave it open. The last step, once we get our final answer here, is to make sure we put it into simplest form. So we're asking ourselves, what can I divide 8 and also divide 12 by? The answer is 4. Now we could have also divided by 2, but 4 is the largest number that we can divide both of those by. So we're going to divide by 4 and give us an answer of 2/3. So our answer is 2/3 for the difference there. Now, just a quick review of what we're doing when we borrow. So here was our 2 and 6/12. When we borrow, we're going to cross off the whole number. We're going to obviously take 1 away from that. So 2 becomes 1. We are then going to add whatever this denominator is. Whatever it is. If it's an 8, we're going to add 8/8. If it's a 6, we're going to add 6/6. If it's a 15, we're going to add 15/15. In this case, it is a 12. So we're going to add one whole as a fraction, 12/12, to our original fraction, which is 6/12. That is going to give us our 18/12. And then this whole number that we've changed it to comes with it. And that is how you rename your mixed number using borrowing. Now, if we look down here at the bottom, the question that they have explained why it is important to write equivalent fractions before renaming. Remember, the first thing we're going to do is find our common denominator, and then we're going to make equivalent fractions. Well, the reason why we make our equivalent fractions is because sometimes you may not need to borrow. Or, in this lesson, the top fraction is smaller than the bottom fraction, so we have to rename. So in order to determine if we need to rename or not, we need to make sure we have equivalent fractions first so that we can determine if the top fraction is either larger or smaller. So make sure you fill in the book. You need to determine if renaming or borrowing is even needed. Final answer was 2/3 here. On the next page, they've taken the exact same question we just had, and in this case, we're going to use the least common denominator. On the first fraction, we did not use the least common denominator, we just used a common denominator of 12. But if we look at 2.5, and we look at 1 5/6, if I count by 2's and I count by 6's, the first number that they would have in common is 6. So 6 is our common denominator. I would multiply 2 times 3, and whatever I do to the bottom, I'm also going to do to the top. So on the top, we have 2 3/6. On the bottom, we didn't do anything with 5/6, so we're going to leave it, and it's going to be 1 5/6. So to make equivalent fractions here, you had to change one of them. The other one was already the same common denominator. As I look to step 2 here, we need to make sure we go to subtract, and we have 3/6 minus 5/6. So when I try to subtract these two, my 3/6 is smaller than the 5/6 here. So in this case, we have to borrow. We borrow from the 2, make it a 1, and we add 1 whole to our fraction. Well, remember, we have to have a common denominator. So we're going to add 6/6 to our fraction because that equals 1 whole. That gives us 3 plus 6, which is 9, over our common denominator of 6. Our original whole number, or I guess our new one after we renamed it, comes with it. And then we just bring over the bottom mixed number, 1 5/6. Now, they want us to rewrite here in step 3, write it out horizontally. I'm going to go ahead and cross this off because, remember, we're always stacking these fractions up. So when we check your textbook, make sure that you fill this in with them stacked on top of each other. 1 5/6. Now that we have renamed or we have borrowed, we have 1 9/6 minus 1 5/6. 9 minus 5 is 4 over 6. 1 minus 1 is 0. Leave it alone. You don't have to put 0 out in front. The last step is to always make sure that you can put it into simplest form. In this case, 2 goes into both of them. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And 2/3 is our final answer. Now, the first 2 problems may be a little confusing. At first, for a lot of students, it seems kind of difficult or maybe confusing on how we determine. The more example problems that we do, maybe the easier this concept will become, or you might start to catch on to things. So keep following along here as we keep going. We are not doing the estimation, so you can go ahead and scratch the estimation part off here. And we're just going to continue on with our subtracting. The first step is to set these two problems up vertically or stack them. Step 1, find a common denominator. So we're counting by 2s and counting by 5s until we find a number that they have in common. That common denominator is 10. So we ask ourselves, what did I do to 2 to get 10, which is multiply by 5? Do the same to the top. My whole number 4 comes with it. On the second mixed number, we multiply this by 2. Whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. And my whole number again comes with it. Now we're ready to subtract. We're looking at 5/10 minus 8/10. 5/10 is smaller than 8/10. So we cannot subtract that. So here's where we're going to cross off the 4, make it a 3. We're going to add whatever this common denominator is. Since it's a 10, we're going to add 10/10. So we have 5/10 plus 10/10, which is 15/10. Our new whole number is a 3. That will also come with it. We are subtracting, and we bring over this mixed number, 3 and 8/10. Nothing happens with the bottom mixed number. You just keep bringing it across. And now we are in a position where the top fraction is bigger than the bottom fraction, so we can go ahead and subtract. 15 minus 8 equals 7 over 10. 3 minus 3 is 0, so I don't have a whole number here. 7/10 is already in simplest form, so we are done. Number 2, 9 and 1/6 minus 2 and 3/4. First step, find a common denominator. Count by 6s, count by 4s, find a number they both have in common. The least common denominator is 12. So we're going to change them both to 12s. In order to do that, we would do 6 times 2. So I do 1 times 2, just 2. We're going to do 4 times 3. So I do 3 times 3, which is 9. My whole numbers come with it. Now we look to see if we're able to subtract. 2/12 minus 9/12. We cannot do. 2 is smaller than 9, so we cannot subtract these. So we're going to cross off the 9, make it an 8. We're going to add whatever our common denominator is. Common denominator is 12, so we're going to add 12/12 to our fraction. Now remember, we are adding it. We're not just changing it to 12/12. We are adding 12/12 to whatever fraction we already have. 2 plus 12 gives us 14 over 12. Our new whole number is 8. I bring over, made a mistake here, made this a 2, needs to be a 2. Bring over that 2 and 9/12. And then we're able to subtract. 14 minus 9 equals 5 over 12. Now we can subtract whole numbers. 8 minus 2 equals 6. Check to see if our fraction is in simplest form. The only thing that goes into 5 that also goes into 12 is 1. So therefore, that is in simplest form. So remember, the key step to borrowing here, the only thing that is new for us today is crossing off the whole number and taking 1 away. Looking at the whole number, or the common denominator, and adding a whole number that has that common denominator. So if it's 10, we're adding 10 tenths. If it's 12, we're adding 12 twelfths. If it's a 4, we're adding 4 fourths. So whatever that common denominator is, that is the fraction that we're adding to it as one whole. So the top number and the bottom number are exactly the same. Zoom in here so we have a little more room to work. Let's look at number 3. Again, we're not going to do the estimation part. But we are going to use that line up there to help space it. 3 2/3 minus 1 11/12. First step, find a common denominator. So we're going to count by 3s. We're going to count by 12s. A common denominator for these two would be, again, 12. We're doing a lot of 12 as the common denominator in these examples. We want to change this top one into a 12. So we do 3 times 4. So I do 2 times 4 to keep it equivalent. 3 is my whole number. The bottom mixed number I just brought straight over because it was already a 12. So we have 1 11/12 on the bottom. We are not able to subtract 8 minus 11 because 8 is smaller than 11. So we're going to borrow from the whole number. The 3 is going to become a 2. And because our common denominator is 12, we're going to add 12 twelfths to our existing fraction. That's going to make it 2, because that's our whole number. 8 plus 12 is 20 over 12. So we have 2 20 twelfths on the top. On the bottom, we're just going to continue to bring that fraction over. 1 11/12. We then have a fraction on top that is larger than the fraction on the bottom, so we can subtract. 20 minus 11 equals 9 over 12. 2 minus 1 equals 1. The last step is to make sure that we can put this fraction into simplest form. Remember, 3 can go into 9 as well as 12. That gives you a final answer of 1 3/4. Number 4. 4 1/4 minus 2 1/3. Find a common denominator, count by 4s. count by threes. They both can turn into, again, 12. 12 is a popular common denominator in this lesson. 4 times 3, so we do 1 times 3. Gives us 4 and 3/12 on the top. 3 times 4, so we do 1 times 4, and that gives us 2 and 4/12 on the bottom. 3/12 cannot be subtracted by 4/12, so we will rename this by borrowing. Cross off the 4, make it a 3. And again, the common denominator is 12. We're going to add 12 12s. Remember, it's not always going to be a 12. Sometimes it could be a 10. Sometimes it could be an 8. Sometimes it could be a 3. So whatever that common denominator is, what we are going to add. When we add here, we should get 3 as our whole number, because that's what we got when we borrowed from it, and 15/12, because 3 plus 12 is our 15. Nothing happens to our bottom mixed number, it just continues to come over. So that would be 2 and 4/12. Now we can subtract. 15 minus 4 is 11 over 12. And 3 minus 2 equals 1. So we're left with 1 and 11/12. 11/12 is in simplest form. So that is your final answer there. One more example, and then we'll let you kind of work on your own. Again, we're not doing the estimation. We're going 5 and 2/5 minus 1 and 1/2. First, start with a common denominator. Count by 5s, count by 2s. They both can turn into 10. We're going 5 times 2 to get to 10, so we do 2 times 2, which is 4. 5 and 4/10, making an equivalent fraction with a 10 on the denominator on the bottom. 2 times 5, so we do 1 times 5, and that would be 1 and 5/10. We cannot subtract 4/10 minus 5/10, so we're going to borrow. We borrow from the 5, make it a 4. We're going to add, because our denominator is 10, we're going to add 10/10. So we can rename this fraction. That leaves us with 4 as our whole number. 4 plus 10 is 14. Didn't leave myself much room here. Let me go ahead and erase myself a little bit more room here to work. We added 10/10. Gives us an answer of 4 and 14 over 10. Our mixed number on the bottom just keeps coming over. It's 1 and 5/10. Now we can go ahead and subtract. 14 minus 5 is 9. Denominator stays a 10. 4 minus 1 is 3. And our fraction is 3 and 9/10. Now I want to look at number 7 here before we get to some on our own. If you look at number 7, we have 6 minus 3 and 1/2. So if I set this problem up, we have 6 minus 3 and 1/2. Whenever there's just a whole number, these kind of problems are a lot easier because you don't have to worry about borrowing and adding or any of that. When you have this, we don't have a fraction here. So we get to make whatever fraction we want with that common denominator. So what we're going to do when we have this, we have nothing minus 1/2. So we're going to borrow from the 6, make it a 5. What's our common denominator? It's a 2. So we're going to add 2 over 2, or 2 halves, to nothing. So we just have 2 over 2, 2 halves. 2 halves equals 1 whole, plus the 5 that we have as a whole number gives us back to our 6. So we just have 2 over 2. Now we can subtract. 2 over 2 minus 1/2 equals 1/2. And 5 minus 3 equals 2. So on problems that just have a whole number, all you have to do is borrow, look at the common denominator, and write that fraction as a whole. So 5 over 5, 6 over 6, 8 over 8, whatever it may be, and then go ahead and just subtract. All right, now that we've finished number 7 here, I want you to do numbers 6 and 8 on your own. Now, if you want to work them out on a separate sheet of paper, that's fine because of spacing. But I want you to just do number 6 and number 8. Remember, if you're doing them on a separate sheet of paper, either make sure you transfer your work back into the textbook, or make sure you keep that separate sheet of paper and bring it into class so we know that you took your notes today. So work this problem out, number 6 and number 8, and then we'll reveal the answers to those in a second. All right, now that you've completed number 6 and number 8, let's go through those. I'm going to use a separate sheet of paper here, or a separate slide, so that we have some room. 11 1/9 minus 3 2/3. Remember, the first step is always to find a common denominator. Our common denominator for 9 and for 3 is 9, because we can count by 3s and count by 9s and land on both 9. The top mixed number does not change at all. So the bottom one, we want to make an equivalent fraction to that. We take 3 times 3, and we do the same to the top. 2 times 3 equals 6. The whole number just comes over with it. We look to subtract, but we can't take 1/9 minus 6/9 because 1/9 is smaller. So we borrow. This is where we cross off the 11, make it a 10. And we add, look at our common denominator, 9. So we add 9/9 to our fraction. We get 10. 1 plus 9 equals 10. So we get 10 and 10/9. We bring our bottom mixed number over. So we have 3 and 6/9. Now we're ready to subtract. 10/9 minus 6/9 is 4/9. 10 minus 3 equals 7. 4/9 is in simplest form, so it is 7 4/9. On number 8, you should have found a common denominator for 3/8 and 1/2. Both can turn into 8s. So we'll just leave the top alone. The bottom, to make an equivalent fraction, we take 2 times 4, and we do the same to the top, 1 times 4. So we have 3 4/8 on the bottom. So 4 3/8, 3 4/8. 3/8 minus 4/8 we cannot do. 3/8 is smaller. So we rename our mixed number here. We borrow from the 4, make it a 3. We add 8 eighths because that's the common denominator. When we do that, we should get 3, because that's our whole number. 3 plus 8 equals 11 eighths. Bring this mixed number over, and we have 3 and 4 eighths. Now we go ahead and subtract. 11 eighths minus 4 eighths is 7 eighths. 3 minus 3 equals 0. So we are done. 7 eighths is our answer. Now, if you look to question number 9, we're going to work through this problem here together. I don't have a whole lot of room to work on this page, so I'm going to go back to the separate slide. We're going to look at question number 9 here. 9 and 1/6 minus 3 and 5/8. Now we're going to work this one together because of the common denominator here. If we counted by 6s and counted by 8s, we could find the first number that they would have in common was 24. Or some of you multiplied 8 times 6 and got 48. Either one would work, 24 or 48. 48 is going to require a little bit more work. So we're going to use the least common denominator of 24. Again, same steps every time. Find a common denominator, figure out what you multiply to get to that common denominator. 8 times 3, so I do the same to the top. 5 times 3 is 15. The whole number comes with it. 6 times 4, so I do 1 times 4. And I get 9 and 4 24ths. We check to see if we're able to subtract. 4 24ths minus 15 24ths we cannot do. So we have to borrow from the whole number. 9 becomes an 8. And we add 24 24ths. Because 24 is the common denominator, we're going to add 24 24ths because that equals 1 whole, and that's what the common denominator is. Once we do that, we get 8. 4 plus 24 is 28 over 24. The common denominator stays the same. Bring the 3 and 15 24ths over. Now we are able to subtract 28 minus 15. If you need help, you can go off to the side and do your subtracting there. We would get 13 when we subtract them. So that's going to give us 13 24ths. 8 minus 3 for the whole numbers gives us 5. If you look, there is nothing that goes into 13 that also can go into 24 except 1. So it is in simplest form. If you did your work on a separate sheet of paper, make sure you either copy the answer over here and bring your notes with you, or transfer your work into the space provided for questions 6, 8, and 9. All right, that ends today's lesson. Good job, everybody. I know it may be a little bit difficult right now. I promise you, the more we work problems, the easier it will get. The last thing we need to do for our lesson check is make sure that you catch the hint here at the bottom. So, for today, your lesson check to make sure everybody paid attention and wrote everything in that you need to. Here's what you're going to write in at the very bottom. You need to write that Mr. Reindell is the best. Make sure you put that at the bottom. Even if you're Mrs. Loddick's students, make sure you put it at the bottom. Mr. Reindell is the best, and make sure you show that to her in class tomorrow. Great job today. Continue on to do your homework. If you have questions, please reach out, or please go back through the video if you have any questions that you need to work these problems out. Great job today, guys. Have a great day.